January 897 AD, Rome, Italy. In the Grand Basilica of St. John Lateran, the most powerful church officials in the Christian world have gathered for a trial. Cardinals sit in their crimson robes. Bishops clutch their staffs. Pope Stephen VI presides from his throne, his face twisted with rage. The defendant, also a pope, Pope Formosus, who has been dead for 9 months. His rotting corpse has been dug up from his tomb, dressed in full papal robes and propped up on a throne. A teenage deacon has been assigned to speak for him, and Pope Stephen is screaming accusations at a dead body. Why did you usurp the Roman See in such a spirit of ambition? Stephen shrieks at the corpse. The corpse, being dead, does not answer. This is the Cadaver Synod, and yes, it actually happened. Welcome to medieval politics. It gets weird. Okay, to understand how we got here, you need to understand that the 9th century papacy was basically Game of Thrones with better hats. After Charlemagne's empire fell apart, Italy became a violent free-for-all. Different noble families fought for control of Rome, and the Pope was right in the middle of it. Between 872 and 965, the Vatican went through 24 popes, and many of them didn't die of natural causes. Pope John VIII, poisoned. When the poison worked too slowly, someone bashed his head in with a hammer. Pope Adrian III, assassinated. Being elected pope in this era was less of an honor and more of a death sentence with fancy robes. Into this chaos stepped Formosus. Born around 816, he was a talented diplomat who became Bishop of Porto near Rome. He was so good at his job that when he went to Bulgaria on a missionary trip, the Bulgarian king begged the Pope to let Formosus become their archbishop. The Pope said no because church rules said bishops couldn't switch to a different diocese. Remember that rule. It becomes important later. Formosus made enemies. He backed the wrong candidate for Holy Roman Emperor and had to flee Rome. He was excommunicated and stripped of his position. Then he was forgiven. Then he came back. In 891, at around age 75, Formosus was elected pope. Now here's where it gets complicated. The most powerful family in Italy was the House of Spoleto. Guy III of Spoleto had forced the previous pope to crown him Holy Roman Emperor. When Formosus became pope, he had to recognize Guy and his son Lambert as co-emperors. But Formosus didn't trust them, so he secretly invited a rival king, Arnulf of Carinthia, to invade Italy. Arnulf's first invasion failed, but in 896 he tried again, and this time he succeeded. Formosus crowned Arnulf as Holy Roman Emperor, replacing Lambert. The Spoletans were furious. Then in April 896, Formosus died of a stroke. He was buried in St. Peter's Basilica with full honors, and that's when his problems really started. After Formosus died, his successor Boniface VI lasted exactly 15 days before dying himself. Some say gout, others say poison. In this era, you couldn't really tell the difference. Then Stephen VI became pope. Stephen had been made a bishop by Formosus himself, but Stephen was backed by Lambert of Spoleto and his mother, the Empress Agiltrude. They were back in power now that Arnulf had retreated, and they wanted revenge on Formosus, even though Formosus was dead, especially because he was dead, actually. You see, if they could prove Formosus had been an illegitimate pope, then everything he did would be invalid, including crowning Arnulf as emperor. Problem solved. So in January 897, Pope Stephen ordered Formosus's body dug up from his tomb. The corpse, which had been decomposing for about 9 months, was dressed in full papal robes. It was carried into the Basilica of St. John Lateran and propped up on the papal throne. Picture the scene, the Grand Basilica filled with church officials who had been ordered to attend. Many of them had been ordained by Formosus. If the trial found him guilty, their own positions would be invalid too. They sat there horrified as a rotting corpse slumped on a throne before them. A teenage deacon was appointed to defend the dead pope. This poor kid had to stand next to a decomposing body and somehow argue on its behalf while the most powerful man in the Christian world screamed accusations. The charges? Formosus had violated church law by switching from the bishopric of Porto to become pope. Remember that rule about bishops not changing dioceses? They were using it against him now. He was also charged with perjury and coveting the papacy. Pope Stephen acted as prosecutor. Contemporary accounts say he was raving, screaming at the corpse, demanding it answer the charges. The chronicler Liutprand of Cremona recorded Stephen shouting, "When you were Bishop of Porto, why did you usurp the universal Roman see in such a spirit of ambition?" The corpse, predictably, had no response. One account from the Annales Alemannici describes what happened. Blood was flowing from his mouth, and he was thrown into the river. Whether that blood was real or symbolic, the image is horrifying either way. The verdict was never in doubt. Formosus was found guilty on all charges. His papacy was declared null and void. Every priest, bishop, and official he had ordained was stripped of their positions. All of his official acts were invalidated. But Stephen wasn't done. The corpse was stripped of its papal robes. Then, in a final act of humiliation, they cut off the 3 fingers of Formosus's right hand. These were the fingers he had used to give blessings. By removing them, they were symbolically saying he had never had the right to bless anyone. The mutilated body was first buried in a cemetery for foreigners outside holy ground, but even that wasn't enough for Stephen. He ordered the corpse dug up again and thrown into the Tiber River. Formosus was gone, his legacy erased, his body, now fingerless and rotting, sinking into the river. Or so Stephen thought. Here's where karma comes for Pope Stephen. According to legend, a fisherman pulled Formosus's body from the Tiber. When the corpse was recovered, people claimed it began performing miracles. The faithful reported visions of saints appearing around the waterlogged body, saluting it. Around the same time, an earthquake struck Rome. It damaged the Basilica of St. John Lateran itself, where the trial had been held. People saw this as a sign of God's anger at what Stephen had done. One contemporary wrote that the stones themselves were crying out against the monstrosity. Public opinion turned hard against Stephen. The Cadaver Synod was too much, even for an era used to political violence. Putting a corpse on trial, cutting off its fingers, throwing it in a river. Romans had seen a lot, but this was beyond the pale. Within months, there was an uprising. Stephen was deposed, thrown into prison, and strangled to death in his cell in either July or August of 897. His reign lasted barely a year. He got exactly what he had coming. But the chaos wasn't over. Stephen's successor, Pope Romanus, lasted only 92 days. The next pope, Theodore II, lasted less than 3 weeks. But Theodore managed something important in those 20 days. He recovered Formosus's body and had it reburied in St. Peter's Basilica with full papal honors. Theodore's successor, Pope John IX, went further. He convened his own synod that officially annulled the Cadaver Synod. All the bishops and priests that Formosus had ordained were restored to their positions. And John IX established a new rule. It was now forbidden to put dead people on trial. Yes, they had to make that an actual rule because of this. But wait, there's a twist. In 904, Pope Sergius III came to power. He was a member of the Spolitan faction, and he reversed everything again. He reconfirmed the guilty verdict against Formosus. Some accounts even say he had the body dug up for a second time and beheaded. Formosus was buried, unburied, and reburied so many times that historians have lost count. His body was a political football for decades. The Cadaver Synod sounds insane to us today, but is it really that different from what we still do? We put dead people on trial in the court of public opinion all the time. We cancel historical figures. We rename buildings, tear down statues, and argue about whether someone who died centuries ago deserves their reputation. We put dead people on trial in the court of public opinion all the time. We cancel historical figures. We rename buildings, tear down statues, and argue about whether someone who died centuries ago deserves their reputation. And right now, we're watching the opposite happen: efforts to scrub uncomfortable truths from history, restoring names and statues we'd finally reckoned with, burying the facts that make America look complicated so we can pretend the past was simpler. Stephen VI wanted to erase Formosus from history. Some people want to erase history itself. The difference is we don't dig up their actual bodies, usually. In 2019, Spanish dictator Francisco Franco was exhumed and moved from his grand mausoleum to a regular cemetery. People cheered. It was, in its own way, a kind of cadaver synod, stripping the dead of their honors. What Stephen VI wanted wasn't really justice. He wanted to destroy Formosus's memory, to erase his influence, to make it as if he had never existed. We understand that impulse. And honestly, we're not even being symbolic about it anymore. We're rewriting textbooks, renaming programs, burying entire chapters of history. Stephen dug up one body. We're digging up whole graveyards. At least Pope Stephen was honest about his grudge. We dress ours up in twisted ideology. Picture this happening in 2026. A former CEO dies. The new CEO hates him. So they dig up the body, dress it in a suit, and put it on a Zoom call for a shareholder meeting. Mr. Johnson, why did you approve those stock options for yourself? They demand, pointing at the screen. The corpse, propped up in an Aeron chair, remains silent. A frightened HR intern reads prepared statements in the corpse's defense. It would be live streamed, of course. # cadaver meeting would trend on X. The SEC would issue a statement. We are reviewing the legality of deceased shareholder participation. The company's stock would somehow go up by 12%, and someone on TikTok would create Cadaver Synod as a dance. It's mostly sitting limp in a chair and occasionally tapping your foot. So that's the Cadaver Synod of 897. A dead pope was put on trial, found guilty, had his fingers cut off, and was thrown in a river. His accuser was strangled in prison within months. The verdict was overturned, reinstated, and overturned again over the next decade. And here's the kicker. Formosus is still buried in St. Peter's Basilica today. You can find his name on the list of popes entombed there. 9 centuries of chaos, and in the end, he won. Next time, we're looking at the football war of 1969, when Honduras and El Salvador went to war in part because of tensions from World Cup qualifying matches. Thousands of casualties over a footy match. Yep, they love their soccer. Each other, not so much. Be sure to check out my Substack, Intelligence Bulletin from author Daniel P. Douglas, for more podcast series, written articles, and links to my books. Thanks everyone for listening. Have a memorable day.